October 2023, a ballroom in Copenhagen. The occasion is Prince Christian of Denmark's 18th birthday, a celebration of a future king surrounded by the reigning royalty of Europe. And there, among the guests, is Crown Princess Marie-Chantal of Greece, American-born, married into a dynasty that no longer has a throne. Wearing on her head a diamond tiara that the jewellery world had quietly assumed was either sold or simply gone. It is Queen Sophie's tiara, a piece that had not been seen in public for decades. A wide, imposing diadem of large rectangular diamonds in bold geometric settings, dressed in floral and foliate motifs. The kind of tiara that dominates a room. Where had it been? And how did a tiara made for a Prussian princess, worn by a Greek queen, end up glittering under Danish chandeliers, 60 years after the monarchy that owned it ceased to exist? That question is the beginning of a much longer story, one that involves 2 flights into exile, a legal battle at the European Court of Human Rights, a set of trunks discovered in a dusty palace attic, and 3 countries that each have a claim, of one kind or another, on what remains. A crown made in Paris for a kingdom that barely existed. To understand what these jewels mean, you have to understand what the Greek monarchy actually was. In 1832, the newly independent Greek state needed a king. The great powers of Europe, Britain, France, Russia, settled on a 17-year-old Bavarian prince named Otto, the son of King Ludwig I of Bavaria. He arrived in a country he had never seen, speaking a language he did not know, to rule a people who had not chosen him. His father, Ludwig, wanted the occasion marked properly. He commissioned a crown, scepter, and ceremonial sword from the Parisian firm Fossen et Fils, gold, relatively spare in gemstones, modelled on Bavarian forms but decorated with Greek symbols. A considered piece of statecraft rendered in metal. The regalia arrived too late, the ship was delayed, Otto was never crowned. And when he was deposed in 1862 and sent back to Bavaria, he took the crown jewels with him, because in the absence of a coronation, they were arguably his personal property, not the state's. They sat in Wittelsbach family possession for nearly a century in Munich, while Greece cycled through political crises and a succession of imported monarchs. It was not until 1959 that Duke Albrecht of Bavaria agreed to return them. His son, Prince Max, brought the regalia to Athens and handed them to King Paul in a ceremony in the throne room of the palace, timed to mark the 125th anniversary of Otto's entry into Athens. The crown, the scepter, the sword, laid out as symbols of continuity between the first and last kings of Greece. They were used twice after that. Placed on King Paul's coffin in 1964. Placed on Queen Frederica's coffin in 1981. And then they disappeared, not abroad this time, but into the basements and outbuildings of Tatoi Palace, carefully packed, unrecorded, and entirely forgotten. But the regalia were always the formal layer of the story, the real collection, the pieces that carried emotional weight, that were worn and loved and fought over, was built by the queens. Grand Duchess Olga Konstantinovna of Russia arrived in Athens in 1867 to marry King George I. She was 17. She brought with her a cache of cabochon emeralds accumulated under the Romanov tradition of gifting stones on birthdays and name days, deep green, uncut, the kind of emeralds that look as though they belong in a Byzantine reliquary rather than a European court. In her youth, she had worn them sewn onto kokoshnik headbands. In Athens, they became something else entirely. After Olga's death in 1926, those emeralds passed to her grandson, King George II, and his Romanian wife, Queen Elizabeth, commissioned Cartier to create a kokoshnik-style tiara around 5 of the largest stones, framed by stylized diamond E's for Elizabeth, an echo of both Russia and Art Deco Paris. Frederica later altered the piece, removing the top and bottom diamond bands to give it the airy, open silhouette we recognize today. Then there were the rubies, King George I gave Queen Olga a ruby on their wedding anniversary every year, a private sentimental tradition that eventually produced enough stones to build an entire parure. A laurel-wreath tiara of diamond leaves and ruby cluster berries, explicitly echoing ancient Greek victory wreaths. A necklace, earrings, brooches. Olga wore the parure in official portraits in the 1900s and 1910s. It was, in its way, a love story rendered in gemstones. And then there was Queen Sophie. Born Princess Sophie of Prussia, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, she married Crown Prince Constantine of Greece in 1889 and brought with her an imposing diamond tiara whose precise maker remains unknown. Jewellery historians believe it was a wedding gift from either her mother, the German Empress Victoria, or her brother, Kaiser Wilhelm II. It sits high and wide in early 20th century portraits, the kind of tiara that announces itself. These were never crown jewels in the Tower of London sense. There was no formal regalia, no legal framework separating dynastic property from personal property. They were marriage gifts, love tokens, dowry pieces, objects that happened to be worn by queens. That distinction, seemingly minor, would become the fault line of everything that followed. The night the Queen packed her jewel case. By the spring of 1967, Constantine II was a young king presiding over a brittle political system. Elections were scheduled for May. The conservative officers in the army regarded the likely outcome as a mortal threat. In the early hours of April 21st, a group of colonels led by Georgios Papadopoulos moved first. Papadopoulos was a career military intelligence officer, methodical, ideologically rigid, the kind of man who had spent years preparing arrest lists and now, before dawn, was activating them. Tanks rolled into Athens. Leading politicians and trade unionists were in custody within hours. By around 7 in the morning, the coup leaders were at Constantine's door. Constantine faced an impossible choice. He had no loyal troops positioned to resist. Open confrontation, he believed, would mean civil war. And so he swore in the junta's chosen ministers that same evening, an act that gave the colonels the one thing they were missing: the appearance of legality. For many Greeks, it permanently linked Constantine with the coup. Over the following months, he quietly explored ways to reverse it. He traveled to Washington to sound out President Johnson. He drew up a plan with loyal senior officers: fly to the northern city of Kavala, secure army units there, move on Thessaloniki, proclaim a rival government. International pressure, he hoped, would do the rest. It was a plan that fatally underestimated the agility of pro-junta officers in middle commands. At dawn on December 13, 1967, the royal family boarded the royal aircraft at Tatoi. Constantine, Queen Anne-Marie, 20 years old, carrying their 2 small children, Princess Alexia and 8-month-old Crown Prince Pavlos, Queen Frederica, Princess Irene, Prime Minister Collias, informed at the last minute, taken along to give the venture constitutional legitimacy. They flew to Kavala. For a few hours, it seemed as though the balance might tip. The Air Force and Navy, largely royalist, declared for the king. Naval units were ordered north, then the colonels moved. Pro-junta officers arrested or sidelined the royalist generals. In Athens, the junta mocked Constantine on the radio as hiding from village to village and appointed a new regent. A Time correspondent who saw Constantine soon afterwards described a young man limping slightly from fatigue, his face ashen and heavily bearded. That night, in torrential rain, the family reboarded the plane and flew to Rome, landing on December 14th with minutes of fuel to spare. Now, here is where the sources go quiet, and where honesty matters more than a tidy narrative. There is no published inventory of what went on that flight. We know who boarded and roughly when. We do not know which tiaras, if any, were in the luggage. Contemporary reporting stressed the haste of the departure and palaces left as they stood. Town and Country, reconstructing the story from interviews, describes the young Constantine and his teenage bride driven out of Greece, making a harrowing escape, the that forced the family into more than 4 decades of exile. But there are no memoirs from within the family that dwell specifically on the act of packing jewel cases. What we can say with confidence is this: within months of the flight, Anne-Marie is photographed abroad wearing her diamond swan brooch, a recent gift from Constantine to mark Pavlos's birth. Within a few years, the emerald tiara is back on her head at Scandinavian galas. The jewels made it out. How exactly remains one of the quieter mysteries of European royal history. Some have suggested that Anne-Marie's Danish citizenship may have allowed certain pieces to travel through diplomatic channels. Placed in the Danish diplomatic bag, given her status as a Danish princess and sister of the reigning King Margrethe. But no archival evidence has been produced to confirm this. It is a plausible mechanism, not a documented one. The honest line is the most compelling one. We do not know precisely how the tiaras left Greece. We only see that they did, and that they reappear in exile as part of Anne-Marie's working jewel wardrobe, Romanov stones and Prussian diamonds, worn at the courts of still reigning monarchies by a queen whose own kingdom had just been taken from her. Exile, auction, and the jewels that kept moving. In exile, the emerald parure became Anne-Marie's signature. A deposed queen of the Hellenes, wearing cabochon emeralds that had already survived one revolution, the Russian one, which Olga herself had lived through, now navigating another. As late as 2015, she was photographed wearing the emerald tiara at Queen Margrethe II's 75th birthday celebrations in Copenhagen. The rubies appeared less often, but their backstory is extraordinary, and it runs through a woman who deserves to be remembered by name. Miss Baltasi was Olga's Greek-born lady-in-waiting, a woman whose loyalty outlasted empires. During the First World War, when Olga was in Russia and the Romanov world was beginning to collapse, it was Miss Baltasi who rushed to Pavlovsk Palace and smuggled the Queen's jewels out ahead of Bolshevik looting. She appears again in contemporary accounts of 1919, getting those same stones out of Russia as Olga made her final escape. 2 revolutions, the same woman, the same jewels. Her name appears in the historical record almost only in these moments of crisis, which tells you something about the kind of person she was and the kind of loyalty that kept these pieces intact. Those anniversary rubies, assembled into a laurel wreath tiara echoing ancient Greek victory wreaths, had already lived that story before 1967. By the time they reached Anne-Marie's jewel case, they had crossed 2 borders under duress. Not every piece stayed with the immediate family. The Greek key tiara, associated with Princess Alice and Queen Helen, migrated along female lines into the Spanish royal collection, where it is worn today by Queen Letizia. Some pieces followed the women who married out, others followed the women who stayed. In 1991, during a brief political thaw, Constantine was allowed to remove personal possessions from Tatoi. Christie's later confirmed that 850 lots of silver Fabergé ornaments, furniture and paintings were placed in London storage and sold in a 2007 auction. The major tiaras were not among them. The collection contracted, but the identity-bearing pieces held. And then, in October 2023, Queen Sophie's tiara reappeared on Marie-Chantal's head in Copenhagen. No sale documents have ever surfaced. A plausible reading is that the tiara remained with one of Frederica's children, either Constantine or Princess Irene, and passed informally within the family. A tiara of a deposed monarchy glittering under the chandeliers of a still reigning one. The jewellery world had assumed it was gone. It had simply been waiting. 3 countries, 1 crown. Begin with Bavaria, because Bavaria is where the story is most surprising. When Duke Albrecht agreed in 1959 to return Otto's regalia to King Paul, he did so as a gift, not a loan, not a diplomatic deposit, but a deliberate relinquishment of title. In Bavarian legal terms, that act extinguished the Wittelsbach family's claim to the objects. They are no longer listed among the Bavarian crown jewels on display in Munich's residence treasury. and yet the objects remain Bavarian in their very DNA, designed in Munich, paid for by a Bavarian king carrying Bavarian heraldic language. They belong to 3 countries at once, to Bavaria as products of the Wittelsbachs, to the Greek monarchy which claimed them as symbols of its office, and now to the Hellenic Republic, which will display them as national heritage. A crown that was never used for a coronation, returned as a gift, rediscovered in an attic. The Wittelsbachs gave it away, and it still carries their fingerprints. Greece's position is the most formally articulated. After the fall of the junta in 1974, a referendum confirmed the abolition of the monarchy with almost 70% of the vote. In 1994, the socialist government passed a law declaring the royal estates, tatoi polydendri mon repos, along with associated movable property, to be property of the Greek state. Constantine brought a case to the European Court of Human Rights. In its 2000 judgment, the court agreed that the expropriation without compensation violated his property rights. It did not order restitution. It awarded compensation, 12 million euros to Constantine, and the state retained the properties. The family's position has softened considerably. Constantine and Anne-Marie returned to live in Athens in 2013 without seeking restoration of the monarchy. After Constantine's death in January 2023, his heirs affirmed their respect for the Republic. In December 2024, 10 members of the family were granted Greek nationality on the explicit understanding that they accept the Republic and have no property claims. The core tiaras, the emeralds, the rubies, Queen Sophie's diamonds, are treated as private property, stored and worn outside Greece. There is no suggestion the state will attempt to retrieve them. Denmark's role is quieter but structurally significant, not a claimant, but a custodian by circumstance. Danish law separates crown jewels, the royal property trust, and purely private pieces with a clarity that Greek law never achieved. That legal architecture has given the exiled Greek royals a framework their homeland couldn't provide. A way of holding dynastic objects as private property without the ambiguity that made the Greek estates so legally contested. Anne-Marie remains a Danish princess. Her jewels in Denmark have a legal home. The trunks in the attic. And then there is tatoi. As restoration work at the palace intensified in the 2000s, conservators began opening what they found. Hundreds of objects belonging to the former royal family, horse-drawn carriages, cases of old wine, and approximately 70 trunks and suitcases thought to have belonged to Queen Frederica, a woman who spent the last years of her life in exile, whose son was allowed back into Greece for only 6 hours in 1981 to bury her, and who died in Madrid that same year. In 2023, the Ministry of Culture announced the rediscovery of Otto's crown, scepter, and sword in very good condition, well preserved, carefully packed. The official language emphasizes continuity. These are tangible traces of the modern Greek state destined for Parliament. But there is another image available if you allow yourself to sit with it. The trunks of a queen who never managed to finish packing before history intervened, opened decades later by gloved hands in a dusty attic. The crown of a kingdom that never had a coronation, found in a box. Come back now to that Copenhagen ballroom. Marie-Chantal wearing Queen Sophie's tiara, a Prussian jewel on a Greek princess by marriage at a Danish coming-of-age celebration 60 years after the monarchy that owned it ceased to exist. What happens to the material culture of monarchy when a dynasty falls? The Greek answer is, it disperses. It follows the women, through marriages, through exile, through the quiet network of European courts where a deposed queen is still someone's sister. And sometimes, after decades of silence, it simply reappears. On a different head, in a different country, at a party for a boy who will one day be king of somewhere else entirely. The trunks at Tatoi are still being opened. Which part of this story stays with you? The rubies that survived 2 revolutions, the crown that never crowned anyone, or Miss Baltazzi, whose name we almost lost entirely? I'd genuinely love to read your thoughts below. And if this kind of history is what you come here for, a like and a subscription means these stories keep coming.